Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for another in the series of Buried in Treasure Learning Community sessions. Today's session is going to be focused on Chapter 4. And it's titled Meet the Bad Guys, Hidden Barriers to Change. As usual, we're always delighted to join you here in Washington, and hope is you're having a great week so far and had the opportunity to really. We'll take an opportunity as we move on to review last session's main points and objectives, and we'll get rolling. So thank you once again, and let's get right into it. So welcome, and just a reminder that today's meeting is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. This is an interactive meeting, and we encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout the session. The slides and the recording will be sent to you. And just an update, that information will be sent to you via email, as well as the recording of the session will be on the DBHR YouTube, FCS YouTube channel. So look out for that. A note about artificial intelligence, there is a reminder that the use of automated note-taking bots or similar tools during Washington FCS events or meetings require prior approval, so please take note of that. Materials and recording, as I noted, they'll be no longer emailed to you, but as a matter of fact, materials will be uploaded to the chat during today's session, and the recording of today's session will be available on HCA FCS channel, Foundation Communities Supports YouTube channel. So as we move through the sessions, you'll note that we're focusing on one or two chapters in each individual session. Today's session will be focused on Chapter 4, Meet the Bad Guys. And most of you will want to know what does it mean in terms of meeting the bad guys? And we'll talk some more about what that really speaks to. Whom are the bad guys, and what does it really focus on? So prior to that, we want to take a quick review of last month's session. And for some of you, it may certainly be information that you're familiar with. For those who are joining us for the first time, just follow along and we'll give you a sense as to where we are in the process. So from the October meeting, we really looked at assessments. We looked at challenges to addressing cluttering. That was focused really on where the person who is engaging that behavior, what's the level of insight they have into the nature of their hoarding behavior and its impact on their overall functioning. We talked about how do we cope with those challenges, and certainly what are some of the reinforcements. We looked certainly at where people are in their level of understanding about the impact and the significance of hoarding behavior. We talked about those folks who are open to discussion, and oftentimes we focused on the essence that they are in, particularly in a stage either of contemplation or preparation or readiness to really make some change. And for those folks who are in that stage of change, we recommend certainly using assessment to determine the scope of the problem and the level of impairment hoarding behavior may have on their overall functioning in their lives, so to speak. And as well as the folks who may not be open to discussing or assessing their level of hoarding behavior as an impediment to their overall functioning. And we certainly recommend assessing for safety to reduce harm. So the differentiation here, which is important to note, is that when people are ready for or in a place where they can have a meaningful discussion about the impact of hoarding behaviors on their lives, we focus primarily on assessing the extent of the problem, the degree of impairment, and where that can potentially lead to some change talk and change behavior. And for those who were not ready, who may still be in pre-contemplation or not certain that hoarding even presents a concern, we focus on really some harm reduction element, really looking at how do we assess for safety to ensure people have classically good exit or a way of getting around in their apartments, particularly if the hoarding has reached that point of impeding their movement in the apartment. We look at whether hoarding has resulted in infestation of pests or bugs. We look at other safety measures, and ultimately we look at how do we help that person maintain their best living condition or their most reasonable living condition in spite of hoarding. And we take some harm reduction approaches in that case. So the learning application for last session, last month, really asked you to look at the assessment tools and, if possible, put them into practice to gauge the scope of problems or impairment to the people that you serve and to look at some of the harm reduction approaches. So the question is for anyone who's here who was engaged in last week's session and had the opportunity to utilize some of the tool, did you try any of the assessment tool or resources? And if you did, how did it go? So certainly I hope that someone may have had the opportunity to utilize those tools or resources and to lend some feedback in terms of how it went for you. How did you experience that? And you certainly have the opportunity to unmute and share, or you can share in the chat. Great. Someone said, yes, I did, and it went well. Client was honest and reflective on the reality of the state of things. That's great. And if you're able to really engage with someone in terms of really collaboratively assessing where they see and the significance of hoarding behavior or clutter in their life, it's great to have that kind of discourse that hopefully lends itself to a meaningful engagement, a trusting relationship, a respectful, thought-focused relationship. So hopefully the assessment tool help in that regard. Glad to hear that someone put it into practice. Fantastic. Certainly listening to the book and chapter by chapter element really helps you to not only get the theoretical information, but to be able to put it into practice and come back to this forum and get some feedback and to share your insight into how putting those particular practices into action, what you're able to gain from them, and how does it change your or impact your ability to provide services. And Tyler says, at the very least, I saw the whole situation differently rather than only just a big mess. I saw a person struggling with layers of issues. Spot on, Tyler. I think that's the biggest paradigm shift that we want to make in the interim, which is to really look at hoarding behavior and clutter as more than simply someone's inability or unwillingness or lackadaisical or lazy approach, but it's really looking at it through the scope of a significant psychological, emotional, behavioral challenge. Great. And the hope is this training really helps to give you some insight as to how you can view and resonate with the challenge more from a person-centered, really disease conceptualization of the behavior as opposed to seeing the behavior as simply an aberrant one. Very good. So I'm glad that at least we have the opportunity to revisit some of the main points of last session and some folks had a chance to practice those, put those assessment tools into practice. For your information, my colleague Crystal put last month's PDF of the presentation into the chat as well, so you can certainly access that. And we will continue to do so to provide you with all the information. So if you're here for the first time, you have a point of reference to where we were in our last session. Glad to hear that it's been helpful, Ariel, and hope it continues to kind of build upon your skill set and really glean your perspective as to how you can really view that person's challenge from more of a therapeutic perspective than simply one that looks at the person as not doing the right thing for themselves. That's the goal here. So, our learning objective for this session is to really recognize key psychological factors. We call them bad guys that can sabotage recovery from hoarding. And we'll go more into what those particular bad guys or psychological impediments look like. And we want to identify how these particular barriers appear in clients within their supported housing environment. What would they look like in terms of behavior, in terms of feedback you get? How do they really resonate with the people that we serve and you in your interactions with them? Want to make sure that you continue to use self-assessment tools to gauge the impact of these obstacles on clients' recovery. So it's not simply understanding that these impediments exist, but to see how they are uniquely impacting the people that you serve and really get a good sense as to not only how you identify them, but how you take steps to moderate them, how you take steps to help people cope and develop those tools that they can be more self-directed in their management of these obstacles. So, quickly, what I want to do is to kind of get a sense from you as to how you see some of these psychological challenges presenting in your work with folks. And in doing so, I want to take the opportunity to present a poll and have you give me some feedback on how you see those elements occurring. So I'm going to launch a poll and ask if you can quickly just present us with some responses in terms of how you how you answer this question. So the question is, in your current work with clients in supportive housing, what is the biggest obstacles you notice to them when making progress with decluttering, letting go, rehousing their possessions? What are the most prominent or topical challenge to doing so from those examples? And I'll give you a minute or so to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to present their feedback. All right. So another 10 seconds and I will end the poll and present the results and we'll take a look at it. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So once again, the question posed to you was, in your current work with clients in supportive housing, what is the biggest obstacle you notice to them making progress with decluttering, letting go, rehousing their possessions? And a great majority of you said unhelpful beliefs. I think we have responses in all categories. Similarly, people said of avoidance or excuse making. So the prominent obstacles here were unhelpful beliefs and avoidance and excuses. We also noted that some folks mentioned overthinking, paralysis by analysis, and hoarding wasn't considered a top priority. It was a low priority for folks. And all of these, and thank you for providing some response. To note, all of these issues really can be impactful, can serve a significant impediment in people's effort towards addressing hoarding. Misty says, I think challenges I see with this is that attachment clients have to their items. Absolutely. We have so much sentimentality in my clients, a combination of two or more of these issues. So oftentimes you'll see multiple presentation of these issues in some clients, or a strong emphasis on one or the other, or one of the four. So, but they're all oftentimes presenting in our clients, and sometimes at different phases of change or different times when you work with them. But those questions really point to those primary obstacles or impediments that we oftentimes speak to when we say the bad guys. And Alana says, I noticed a lot of huge desires to change, and yet it seems overwhelming, not knowing where to start, or fears of not doing it correctly, as in the only take something off the top, for example, and it doesn't necessarily clear a space, so there's feeling of defeat. Absolutely, Alana. You have really laid out a great picture of what's oftentimes the most prominent challenge among our consumers. So we'll really look at them individually to get a good perspective as to what they really are and why they present in the manner in which they present, and how they serve as an impediment to the people we serve and their efforts to change. So firstly, we want to know why is it important to look at these psychological and behavioral challenges we call the bad guys? But first of all, it focuses on those psychological, cognitive, and behavioral obstacles to clearing clutter and making change. So we talk about really looking at it from the perspective that people are oftentimes challenged by making that psychological shift in really looking at behaviors that were normative prior, that now becoming those same sources of really significant problems. So we believe that the more you understand these problems, these particular challenges, the better equipped you'll be to help someone beat them, because you can only tackle and challenge and really address what you clearly understand. What we also know is that these bad guys need to be named and addressed explicitly. If you don't truly identify what they are and the impact they have, it is extremely difficult to address them concertedly and intentionally. We've also learned that if you don't tackle these concerns, these bad guys, clients may stall, revert, or avoid change process, or even with good motivation and resources, these particular impediments can still undermine efforts. So no one is necessarily free of these concerns in efforts to address hoarding. And at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone faces the same level of challenge or the intensity of the challenge. But ultimately, we know we have to be cognizant that they exist. We have to share that and inform and educate our consumers on what it is that oftentimes are those voices or those thoughts in their minds that really impact and oftentimes undermine their efforts. So it's important to recognize not only what we do that creates a cluttered environment, but how what we think and why we think what we think can certainly impact how we behave. So it's important to recognize that we're shifting in the mode here and we're looking at it through that cognitive behavioral lens and perspective. People are more than simply their behavior. Those behaviors are driven by underlying feelings, thoughts, and therefore we have to tackle all of them simultaneously in order to actually impact the behavioral change that we know and the evidence is shown that can result in a change in their environment. So the purpose of really meeting the bad guys or getting to know these psychological and cognitive impairment, what prevents people from benefiting from efforts to organize and discard? What has been their personal experience? What about your professional experience? What are some of the concerns that you have had in terms of, wrangling or struggling with the way people think and how it impacts their behaviors? Because ultimately, it impacts both the person who is trying to make the change and you who are trying to support them in making that change. It's the ways of thinking that are the bad guys. And the goal of this session is to truly garner enough information that helps you fully understand what these presenting obstacles may be so you can share and educate your consumers on what is it that makes them feel the way they feel and the thoughts that really drive those behaviors. You want to be able to help your consumers see the barriers coming as well as you so they can prepare in advance. They're predictable barriers that come, particularly different elements of change or different process at time of the change process. You want to build up resources to counteract those challenges. So you're not going in there and just trying to figure it out when you're in the midst of those major emotional battles. And then really be able to learn the good guys, the strategies that address those specific concerns. And we consider them, we call them the good guys, and we'll be talking about them next month. So let's look at what are these bad guys? Who are they? What do they look like? There are five major bad guys or cognitive emotional challenges that significantly impact people's effort to make a change in terms of hoarding behavior. It's just not my priority. When addressing hoarding behavior is not prioritized, letting unhelpful beliefs get in your way, overthinking or confusing yourself with really trying to figure out the best possible storage or collection or the way to manage those elements, and we'll talk some more at length on what that looks like. Excuse making and avoidance, and I think many of you mentioned that is very common already, and going for short-term payoffs. Like most of us, we want to get to the early wins, and sometimes that's the only motivation factor we have. If I can see something change in a short time, it's likely to motivate me more to do so. And then I may not necessarily build up the resilience and the stamina to continue working on it until I get to my desired outcome. So we look at it specifically. Let's start with the first of those bad guys. It's just not my priority. What does this mean? Ultimately, it means there isn't adequate or sufficient time spent on the effort or decluttering. The client or staff or team, and once again, this is a significant one where both parties can be negligent in this regard or fall short of this particular effort. So, in many instances, both the client and staff who's trying to support them and help them and guide them may view decluttering as low on the list of priorities because there may be a lot of competing demands, other tasks, mental health symptoms, or life stressors. So, without a clear prioritization, the behavior stays over there while our current items take over and little progress occur. So we have that instance where the consumer says, I understand I have major problems. My house is getting cluttered. I may not be able to move around. I may fail my upcoming inspection. I know the bugs are taking over my stuff. I can't cook on my stove because it's full of stuff on the stove top. I'm concerned about my health and safety. My last assessment said I'm a major fall risk. All the presenting functional issues, they know it. But right now, I have so much financial problems. I have so much social issues with my family, getting on my case. My case manager say I'm about to be evicted. My landlord is on my case. Addressing hoarding does not become my priority. I need to fix all these other things, and then I'll get to hoarding. Then I'll get to start decluttering. And we know what happens when you take that approach. It becomes the lowest thing on the totem pole, the lowest priority, and it continues. So how does it show up when someone doesn't make decluttering a priority? Oftentimes you hear those statements, it's not that bad. I don't see what the big fuss is about, right? Why are you coming into my home and making a big fuss about hoarding? I don't understand why my mom is complaining every time she comes over here, so I just stopped inviting her, right? I know I'm lonely, but I'd rather be lonely than to be, harassed and fussed on by everyone else. Or the classic, my house might be messy, but whose house isn't? And before you know it, you start hearing all the rationalizations or euphemisms associated with the significant hoarding or cluttering problem. So it's important to recognize that this is an attempt to cope, but certainly one that is not effective. Another example is I'll get to it when I have time next week, right? Right now, I'm just trying to get through my day. I'm trying to manage my symptoms. I'm trying to stay well. All the which may be good intention excuses or feedback, but it doesn't address the problem. So it's either a lack of awareness or the person may be aware and unhappy, but cluttering is still a low priority. And once again, I think a lot of you mentioned, the person may simply have a major problem with getting started and getting really addressing the concerns that they have. They may start to consider removing specific things. The reason to have to save outweighs that to change. So the person may be ambivalent. Items may have value, usefulness, or sentimental value that they can't seem to address. Decluttering becomes low on the priority list. So this is a major concern. And this is oftentimes, I think, probably the most frequently occurring or popular impediment or bad guy that show up. So it's important to recognize that. And when we do recognize it as it plays out, even in terms of the feedback we get from folks, or them putting things off, or shifting their priority, or not speaking to it in a priority way, we understand that change happens when the reason for change outweigh the reasons for not changing. Very seldom do you find people making those change until they find a good reason for making that change, and not 1 minute sooner. So it's important for us as people who are supporting folks who engage in hoarding behavior or impacted by hoarding and cluttering behavior. We have to recognize that we can ring the alarm, you can threaten and coerce. That person is not going to make that change until they find reasons for change that outweigh the reasons for not changing. A shift in that paradigm. So you're not finding yourself working beyond your capacity or trying to be all things to all people or doing more work than the person who is actually faced with a challenge. So how do we really help the people we serve recognize that this is happening? Recognize that this is an impediment, this is a psychological concept, this is actually a cognitive impediment for them. We really look at helping them understand the balance of change. Reasons not to change, and then we look at some reasons to change. So you may have someone saying, I'm pretty happy with the things as they are. Now, oftentimes that could be true. Sometimes it isn't. It just may be the way of that person staving off having to face the reality of what's happening. You may hear my clutter is not hurting anyone. I'm not giving in to those folks nagging me to clean up my place. Because oftentimes acknowledging that problem can make that person feel awful or feel less than or feel devalued. I just don't have the time. Or I tried a few times, it didn't work, so why bother trying? Is that familiar to you? Have you heard those overtures, those feedback, those classic kind of retort in your efforts to help folks? The likelihood you've heard most of these comments and feedback. Absolutely, Dawn. Um, I'll get you the links for the previous slideshows. Now, the reason to change is what we need to get people to shift their thoughts and feelings and emotions and connection to. You may be able to help them see how clutter is impacting their social life. Someone may be able to get to the point where you'll be like, you know what? I may want to start doing this to get these people off my back. Even though that is not a sustainable thing, it's a good place to start. I want to get my life under control can be the biggest shift, the biggest psychological takeaway, the biggest thing to hold on to, right? The lifeguard may be that. As a matter of fact, the person may be able to recognize that this clutter isn't safe for me. I don't want to have to live with bugs and rats and all these things in my home, and I know clutter is contributing to that. I need to work on the problem to avoid legal problems or avoid eviction. If I stop overspending on stuff that I don't need and stuff that I'm just storing and cluttering my home, I may be able to have more money to do the things I truly desire to do. So oftentimes we have to help people come up with good reasons and sometimes the language and articulation as to how they're going to actually develop that change talk. What can I say that inspires me internally to take action externally? We can further support folks by really looking at an assessment tool. And that assessment tool that we recommend is, are you ready to change, right? Assessing readiness to change. And there's some great questions, simple questions that can really give people a good understanding as to where they are in terms of their change, their stage of change. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree, please respond to these questions. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a hoarding problem that needs changing. The person can give some feedback. So you're able to really use that tool to help that person come up with a picture and a language for where they think they are in terms of change. And if you can look at some of the questions and they're really into categories, and those categories would speak to where that person may be. So question items 1 and 2 is if you're not ready for change. Item 2 and 3, this is you're thinking about it. So ultimately, we were able to use that assessment tool and then we score. And this tool has some specific guidance on how to use it. There's a certain summation or score at the end that should tell you if that person has that score, then they truly have a significant hoarding problem and they need to address it in a specific way. So it really gives that person the power to gauge their own behavior and its level of impact beyond simply hearing you telling them what you think. Remember, the idea of addressing hoarding through this collaborative effort is to give give the person the power, the knowledge and the skills and resources to not only determine their need to change, but help guide them as to how they can make that change and how they can actually gauge and measure their efforts towards that particular outcome they desire. So this is the first assessment tool that we'll introduce to you today, but it's a great one to get the ball rolling in terms of helping that person recognize where they are in their particular relationship with hoarding. And my colleague Crystal has put some of the assessment tool and in the chat so you can access them. Most of them are available to you in the text as well. So that's an issue with priority. Number 2, the second of those bad guys is letting unhelpful beliefs get in your way. And you may ask, what exactly does that mean? Oftentimes, beliefs about what our stuff mean to us and its impact in our lives can certainly determine how we relate to them in terms of holding on or being able to let go or putting them in their proper place. Beliefs about the usefulness of the object. So there's lots of beliefs, and oftentimes a lot of them are unhelpful with people who hoard in relation to their behavior. So the belief about the usefulness, sometimes we can hold on to something assuming that we would need it, when in reality it's a want. Classic example, and we've talked about that in the early phases. Person has three or four of the same tools, three of them broken and one totally beyond our repair. But there's always this belief that, oh, it's useful. I'm gonna need this scissors, or I'm gonna need this particular stuff somewhere down the road. And these three broken ones, I'm going to use the parts to fix this one and eventually end up with one workable unit. And it never happens. Classic example. Or there's a concept of, well, this particular piece of mail, I'm going to need it somewhere down the road, even though you have a copy of it in other places or you have an online version of it. Classic example, bank statement. You have online banking, but you're holding on to every bank statement over the last 15 years. Some of the bank statements you've already closed out. It's not even active anymore, but he's holding on to it. This belief that if you let it go, it will become critical information at some point, even though you don't know that point, or you haven't had that happen in a long time. So belief about usefulness is a critical one. Perfectionism and fear of making a mistake. If I let this go or I put this in this place, I may forget it. I need to have everything in perfect categories. I need to have all my banking statements in this drawer. I need to have love letters in this drawer. I need to have this. And you create 15 categories and you never get started on storing stuff because you're so focused on perfecting your categorization that you never get into the act of storing. Attachments to possessions is the next. And I think most of you mentioned that in response to the poll. That is very significant. The feeling like discarding an item equates to discarding the person. If it's from refinishing an item to rescuing it, someone may have had a significant loss in terms of a loved one or someone that was close to them, and every single item that they got from that person or shared with that person is a source of sentimental connection with that person, and you hold on to it with the belief that if I let this go, I'm going to forget this person. When reality is, and when we know for a fact that we can choose how to connect with memories of the person that we may have lost. Sally, you're not alone. Sally said, I just put a broken French press that I was going to fix in the trash. Thank you. Absolutely. We've all been there, right? We're holding on to this stuff that somehow we're going to use it in the future and we never get around to fixing it or using it. And as we go through this process, we'll find out there's some rules and guidelines. Like a classic example is, if you haven't used it or worn it in a year, it is not something to hold on to, right? Because it probably doesn't even fit. But we'll get to that as we get into the action phase. So we talk about attachment to possessions, which can be very significant in serving as an impediment to people. I don't want to put this away. I don't want to put it, I want to have it in my view. Beliefs about objects as source of identity. This is probably the most complex emotional challenge for folks. It is my stuff. I'm not going to get rid of it because someone think I should. I want to save it and acquiring and tangle up with beliefs about independence and autonomy. Before you know it, you're fighting battles that it doesn't even exist. Someone says, Earl, why don't you get rid of the 5 bags you have blocking your back door? Oh, and I shifted from the significance of clearing that exit to a battle between myself and the person who asked me to move it or suggested that I move it so that I avoid having to deal with it. I'm going to move that when I'm ready. I don't have to respond to your directions. How dare you come into my house and tell me what to do? How do you know I'm going to fall? And before you know it, you're fighting a personal battle. And it's really intended to avoid having to deal with the insurmountable stuff that you're keeping. Underestimating your memory is another unhealthy or unhelpful belief. You have this concept that I have to keep it in my vision. I have to have a physical cue. It has to be there because if I forget it, then I'm not going to know where to find it. I'm not going to even know I have it. And before you know it, you're holding on to everything for fear that you can't trust your memory to know where to go find it. Taylor says, as someone with ADHD, a loose sense of object permanence, including for important people in my life, I struggle so hard to get rid of birthday cards from people or other small items. Absolutely. And we have certainly some strategies to help folks who are dealing with that permanency issue in a sense that sometimes you can shift from physical to virtual, right? Or you can have someone else kind of hold on to it for you as opposed to it cluttering up your life. So there's ways of doing it. Beliefs about control. As we know, we are intended on maintaining some level of control, and sometimes that control is to our detriment, right? I prefer to win the battle with you than to actually create a safe space because it's more important for me to feel empowered by showing you that you can't tell me what to do or you don't have the corner on my decisions or judgment. So lots of internal battles that are fought that are oftentimes really focused on unhelpful beliefs that get in your way. The way we address that or we try to get a sense of that is really helping people determine what do you believe, right? Over the last week, what are the thoughts when trying to throw something away and how those thoughts impact your ability to discard or store? Because sometimes you ask the question, if I can think of a use for a possession, I should keep it, even though you haven't used it in the last 5 years and it's been in a place that you haven't even remembered it exists. I better save this because I will probably need it sometime. Classic. I don't want to get rid of the jeans that fit me perfectly when I was 18 years old, but now I'm 46. I want to have that image of what I was at the perfect fit at 18, and therefore these jeans represent that best stage of my life. Reasonable, but it's an impediment. So it's important to help that person. Once again, it's all about really working with that person so that they can make that kind of internal connection between how they feel, the way they think, and how it serves as an impediment to changing the behavior of hoarding. So really understanding what the beliefs that are driving your thoughts and feelings and holding on to items is very critical. Nadia says, I recently decluttered my closet and wrote out all the items that I own. That was eye-opening, especially when tempted to purchase another clothing item. Absolutely. So many of us go, you go and say, I've got to get some jeans. I need to feel better. I'm going to get some clothes. I know it's going to make me feel good when I have those 2 bags coming out of the store, or when I see that Amazon reminder that my package is outside, and then you open that package and you're like, oh, I don't have this particular shade of blue jeans. But you have 14 that you haven't worn in the last year. And you can't keep in your mind's eye all the shades of blue jeans that you have if they're past 10 or 12. But you are certain that this one is a unique hue of blue that you don't have. And you just need it. Hence the problem. Start having overwhelming inventory of jeans that you may not even know what you have. So you look at the categories, your belief about usefulness, belief about perfectionism, you really start looking at how your belief drive your concept and your behavior. Next, we look at overthinking and confusing yourself. When we try to sort and organize, even if we recognize we need to make a change, we're committed to doing so, but then we get stuck in we have to have the perfect categories in order to then start organizing. There are three common pitfalls for doing so. You over categorize. Complex organizing, example, many small piles of mail while sorting, lose attention and focus. Instead of simply saying, okay, the mail within the last 3 months, I'm going to put them in this bin and then I'm going to sort them and determine what should go and what should stay. You start thinking of, I need a category for bank statements. I need a category for catalogs. I need 15 categories, and you spend more time categorizing than actually storing. Taylor says there's some apps that allow you to inventory your clothing and picks and even build outfits. Absolutely. There's tremendous amount of tools available to us in the virtual world, as well as some guided webinars on storage and categorizing. But over-categorization is the major problem. Because what we find oftentimes is that people who have significant hoarding problems tend to resort to this kind of perfectionism. To fix the problem, I have to have the perfect solution. A cumbersome process may also be a challenge. To elaborate process to get rid of things that are hard to follow and give up. Because you're striving for perfectionism. I have to have all the blue jeans in this bin, all the art tones in this one, and all the t-shirts in this one, and then my high school t-shirts, and then my college t-shirts, and before you know it, you have 15 categories and no stored, nothing stored. Creative use idea. Thinking of more and more uses for objects, better at thinking of ideas than carrying them out. Oh, okay, this particular knife may be a steak knife, but the reason why I have 10 of them is because the last time I had a steak in 2017, I had one that I couldn't cut through with my regular knife, so I keep 4 of them. And you haven't had a steak in a while. So you have to look at really people come up with a lot of rationalizations and unintended excuses to really hold on to stuff, particularly when they're not certain that ridding themselves of it or discarding it or storing it is going to actually ease the clutter. So we have to look at overthinking and confusing yourself as a major obstacle. And oftentimes this is done with good intentions. So really helping people decipher and determine whether they overthink in their process of trying to store stuff is a good way of helping them figure out, I need to pause. I need to just get moving in the direction of starting storing stuff. Keep, store, dispose, give away. Sometimes 3 or 4 categories, and that's it. If you want to make meaningful inroads into your clutter. You're welcome, Sally. So, the fourth of these is excuse making and avoidance. Kind of speaks for itself. Fear and anxiety are normal responses to stress. Making a change like decluttering is a stressful event. And for some people, it can be traumatic. So we have to take into consideration it's not an easy process. And people will look for rationales or reasons or excuses for not doing so to avoid a difficult task. To some, any fear or anxiety becomes aversive and intolerable, right? Particularly people are in an extreme stress condition or distressing condition because of low distress tolerance. If I start feeling that pit in my stomach, that hurt in my head, that aching because I can't make a decision, I'm going to give up. Low threshold to feel overwhelmed. Worried about bill paying to stop going through all their mails. Oh my God, by the time I get through all these bills, I'm not going to be able to pay my bill because it's going to take 2 months, when you can simply start the process and adjust as you move along. Excuse making or avoidance. I can't do this now. I'm too tired and too stressed out. I'll do this when I feel better. Putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. I'm not a morning person. I don't work very well in the afternoon. I need to rest. My head is hurting. My feet is hurting. Every single, oftentimes, excuse that sounds reasonable. Think of some of the avoidance techniques or approaches that your clients use. What are some of those that you're familiar with? Some of the excuse making that you've come across. And they're not germane to people who have extreme hoarding. They're oftentimes very common people at different stages of hoarding. Absolutely. Avoidance, fear, anxiety, projecting. Lots of reasons for doing so. I had a bad sleep schedule, so it's hard for me to stay awake. Absolutely. Ways of really looking at that concretely is really helping people gauge their own avoidance and the excuses that they make so that they can look at it and see it as a reflection of their own action so that it doesn't feel that it's coming from you and it's pointed and it's antagonistic. Because if folks look through this assessment tool and realize they have some of the classic ones, it's easy to be like, take a look at those. I'm just too tired to do this right now. I'm too stressed out. If you hit most of those, does this speak to intentional avoidance or avoidance on any scale? And if so, how do you want to address this avoidance? Little easier when someone sees it for themselves as opposed to you saying, I notice you're avoiding tackling your decluttering. Absolutely, Miss Mitzi. Classic example. I'm going to donate these things because people need them and someone needs them more than I do, as opposed to discarding. Lots of it occurring. But it's important for people to see it through their own lens, really connect with it on their own level, and not necessarily only hear it from you. Hence, the assessment tools are very helpful to do that. And then we get to the final major impediment or obstacle, going for the short-term payoff. And I'll tell you up front, whether you're dealing with hoarding or any other significant obstacle to change, this is a significant one for all of us. And we all, at some point in our lives, may have faced this particular challenge. Feeling happy from acquiring or keeping items, right? The short-term element. View items as treasures or bargain. Oh, I have to go to that yard sale. The last time I went there, I found a unique stuff that I would never find anywhere else. You can't stop. You can't tell me that I shouldn't go do this. I'm unhappy. When I go shopping, I feel better. I need to feel better. I owed myself some happiness. A million reasons why they continue to do what they need to do, what they're doing. An off-balance relationship favoring what feels good versus what is good. That momentary satisfaction, becoming too dependent on immediate rewards versus the focus on long-term goals. And oftentimes these are complemented or supplemented by other concerns. Those experiences of instability and violence or abuse oftentimes put people in a position where they feel they can't trust that continuity, right? I'm not certain that I'm going to be able to sustain this. Or oftentimes people fight with authority figures because if you're telling me I shouldn't do this, it gives me more inspiration to do it because I want to feel that I have power, even though their behavior is really that of a contrarian that is not helping their circumstances. But it's a feeling of how do I regain, how do I hold on to one bit of a shred of power that I may have that I feel out of control in this particular circumstance. So going for the short-term reward is prominent, it's consistent, it happens more often than you could imagine. But it's a prominent bad guy, it's a prominent cognitive distortion or cognitive challenge that really impact people's ability to declutter. And once again, we have another assessment tool that we use to help people see it through their own eyes, through their own lens, through their own answers and responses. Agree or disagree with the following statement in terms of how you feel right now? Should you make sure that I don't feel bad? Really help people go through the inventory of their common feeling or responses that really lend itself to them seeking the short-term reward, even though it has long-term ramifications that are negative in terms of their addressing their cluttering concerns. So as you'll notice, each one of these bad guys or psychological slash cognitive impediments, we have a specific assessment tool to help that person garner, glean, or decipher how they play out in their lives, and therefore give them an awareness that these are thoughts and they can be changed, they can be modified, they can be reframed. It's not beyond your control to look at the way you think and feel and have an awareness as to how it informs your actions or behaviors. So think of which one of these you may think is prudent or pertinent to your current work with someone or to your own effort to declutter. Are you challenged by a particular bad guy that you think one of these assessment tools can help you get a better sense of and a comprehension of your own feeling and thoughts about it? Really ask yourself, are you ready to change? What do you truly believe? Do you overthink? Do you avoid and make excuses? And can you resist the short-term changes or payoff? You can really take a conscientious look at those particular areas and help you really get a good understanding as to what drives your feelings and thoughts that lend itself to the behavior, or what contributes to the behavior, or why do you behave in the way you behave as it relates to your possessions, clutter, and hoarding, in spite of your awareness that you need to make a change because your current circumstances and environment impedes your ability to function and live in the way you want to live in the environment you want to live. So please um, take heed and really apply some of these assessment tools to specific bad guys or impediments that your consumers or you may be experiencing. And we can certainly talk about them in our next session to see what better understanding you have as to what drives your behavior. So really taking that information and putting it into practice is important at both the staff level and your organizational level. We talk about incorporating the bad guide language into case manager supervision, case manager and supervisor supervision, team meetings and client worksheets. So really talking about those impediments, those cognitive and psychological impediments as they are, as opposed to hiding them in the global problem that the person may have, and really doing some reflective engagement around what is it I'm doing, why is it I'm taking this particular strategy, what tools I'm using, and what are the presenting concerns that the clients I have are engaging in, and how best to approach these given the assessment tools that you have available to you. Use brief check-ins. Which bad guy got in your way this week? Right? You can actually use that with your consumers so that they have more of a conscientious awareness as to what they're tackling in that particular week, that particular session. So they have more of a clear understanding as to what is it that they're really addressing outside of simply just storing stuff or getting rid of stuff. They understand the whole psychological process of changing their paradigm as to how they think about their possession. For supervisors, we talk about coaching staff to recognize when they're stalled by the bad guys in implementing interventions. Because once again, at the beginning of this, I start by clearly outlining that some of these bad guys are also may present in the staff that are supporting clients. Right? You can use excuse and avoidance to not deal with someone who may be stalled in their movement or progress towards change. So there's lots of shared difficulty in managing these cognitive obstacles as well for both staff and the people we serve. Action planning and monitoring. What we suggest is introduce a 1 week monitoring sheet for your client or staff. The date, the time, which bad guy showed up, what happened, what did I do instead of responding in the way I did, and what was the result. So you have some good fodder for evaluation and review over time. We want to encourage you to embed into routines, weekly check-in, case manager supervision. What did you tackle? What bad guy presented with your clients? What bad guy presented with you as you working with your clients? What did you do? What did you do differently? What assessment tool you use? How can you shift that kind of thought and behavior? Want to quickly give people a chance to ask questions. If you have any specific questions, here's an opportunity to raise those questions, and we hope that you're able to not simply understand that there's assessment tools available to you, but the hope is that you take away from today's session a more comprehensive understanding as to the feelings and thoughts and cognitive and psychological challenges that our people are faced and oftentimes drives their behavior or stall them in their efforts to move forward. Absolutely, Jody. Go ahead and ask your question. If you want to unmute, you can, or you
I
can.
just did. Sorry. I couldn't find the raise your hand button. So I was trying
Okay.
to quickly drop it in there. But some of the tools that you had here with
Mhm.
the little circles where you could check what's going on and working with clients, that would be so helpful. Is that in a PDF that you send out like you did the last chapter so that we can use those when we're working with folks?
Absolutely. I can send that. I can make sure that I send that with the PDF so you'll have that as well.
That would be so great. It was I could see that being really helpful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And Crystal just put in the chat all the worksheets. So Jody, you can check that out. Go on that link and the worksheets are there.
I see that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. As usual, we ask that what you've learned from this week, you put into practice, and hopefully next month we have the opportunity to get some feedback from you as to what experiences you've had. So what we're asking is you try to assess for the bad guys using one of the tools that we've just shared. And when you come back next month, we'll ask you how did it go, what was helpful, what was challenging. So we were able to kind of process together to get a sense as to how you can best apply the assessment tools and really take a look at the strategies that are recommended for really addressing those impediments. Just a reminder, next meeting is on the 18th of December. Take into consideration the holidays. It's the same time, same link. One significant note here is that I will not be present at next month's session. Next month's session will be facilitated by my dear colleague, Dr. Crystal Socia, who's been with us throughout these sessions. And it will be focused on meeting the good guys. So it's really next month is going to be focused on the strategies that are recommended to address these bad guys that we addressed, that we focus on this month. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm absolutely sure you'll enjoy Crystal and her unique way of presenting the material. I'm a fan of Crystal, so there you have it. So take a moment if you can to present us with some feedback as to how you experienced this session. What could we do differently? What's working well? What we continue to do? We always want to make sure that we are constantly reviewing the sessions and the way in which they're presented so that we maximize your utility of the material we use and ensure that the session best meets your needs as you begin to or continue to work with the people you serve or for your own personal addressing of hoarding behaviors or clutter concerns. So if you can, please help us by providing some feedback on your evaluation of the session. While you're doing so, I want to wrap up by saying thank you. We appreciate your time and attention and participation. A reminder that today's webinar was hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. We'd like to remind you that the slides and a link to the recording of this session and a wealth of resources will be available to you on the YouTube channel as well as via email. Don't forget to check out Foundational Community Supports newsletter for all things FCS and upcoming training. Thank you all and do have a great rest of the month. Look forward to getting some feedback from you and hopefully you will join my colleague Crystal for next month's session and I will see you back in January. Have a great rest of the day and take care of yourself and each other.